I wasn't expecting much from that Friday night. It was one of those quiet evenings where the world outside my apartment seemed muffled, as if it was too tired to bother with the noise of life. The city lights flickered dimly through my blinds, and the only sound in my small living room was the hum of the fridge and the faint soundtrack of the show I wasn't really watching. For the first time in a long while, I was content, I guess. My life wasn't exciting, but it was stable, peaceful, even. That was before the call. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. I didn't recognize the number at first, just another anonymous caller I was planning to ignore. But something, maybe some cruel twist of fate, made me reach for it anyway. And when I saw the area code, my stomach sank. It was her city. I stared at the screen as if it were a snake coiled to strike. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years since we signed the divorce papers and went our separate ways. 5 years since I packed what little I could into the back of my car and left the house we'd built together. 5 years since I caught her in bed with someone else and realized that the life I thought we shared was a lie. I told myself I wouldn't answer. I swore to myself that she didn't deserve even a moment of my time. And yet, my thumb hovered over the screen, and before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed accept. Hello? My voice came out hoarse, more fragile than I wanted it to. There was a pause on the other end. Static crackled faintly, and then I heard it. The voice I thought I'd never hear again. The voice that had once been my favorite sound in the world. Hi, it's me. I froze. How do you even respond to something like that? How do you talk to someone who tore you apart so completely that you had to rebuild yourself from scratch? What do you want? I finally asked, my tone colder than I expected. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger had burned itself out long ago, leaving behind a numbness I'd grown comfortable with. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, she began, her voice trembling slightly. But I need to talk to you. Please. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell her that whatever she needed to say, it was too late. But something in her voice stopped me. It wasn't the voice of the woman who had lied to me, cheated on me, and destroyed everything we had. It was the voice of someone scared. Talk about what? I asked cautiously. She hesitated again, and when she finally spoke, her words were barely above a whisper. It's about us. About what happened back then. A cold knot formed in my stomach. What could she possibly say that would make any of it better? What was there to explain? She cheated. She lied. End of story. I don't think there's anything left to talk about, I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. Whatever this is, whatever you're trying to do. I'm sorry, she interrupted, and the words hit me like a punch to the chest. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I'm so sorry. For everything. For hurting you. For lying. For ruining us. I think about it every day, and I cut her off. You think about it every day? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Well, congratulations. At least you had the choice. I didn't get to stop thinking about it. I had to live with it. I had to rebuild my entire life because of you. She didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought she might have hung up. But then I heard her take a shaky breath. You're right, she said quietly. I deserve that. I deserve worse. Something in her tone made my defenses falter. She didn't sound defensive or manipulative. She sounded broken. And despite everything, despite the walls I'd built around myself, I felt a flicker of concern. Old habits die hard, I guess. Why now? I asked finally. Why after all this time? I couldn't carry it anymore, she said, her voice cracking. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I needed to tell you the truth. All of it. The truth? My laugh was hollow. I think I know the truth already. No, you don't, she said quickly. You don't know everything. And you deserve to. I owe you that much. There was something in her voice that unnerved me, a desperation I hadn't heard before. For a moment, I considered ending the call. I didn't want to go back down that road. I didn't want to reopen wounds that had taken years to heal. But the thing about scars is that they never really fade, not completely. And a part of me, a small, quiet part one tried to ignore. Needed to know. Fine, I said finally. You want to talk? Then talk. But this doesn't mean anything. I'm not doing this for you. I understand, she said softly. There was a long pause, and then she spoke again. Do you remember that night? The night you found out? I didn't answer. Of course I remembered. How could I forget? There's something you don't know about that night, she continued, her voice trembling. Something I've been too scared to tell you. My chest tightened. What are you talking about? Her next words sent a chill down my spine. The man you saw me with, he wasn't who you think he was. My heart was pounding now, a mix of anger and confusion swirling inside me. What are you saying? Don't play games with me. I'm not, she said quickly. I swear, I'm not. Just please let me explain. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell her I didn't care. But the other part, the part that had spent 5 years searching for closure, couldn't let it go. Fine, I said finally. You've got 5 minutes. What she told me next would change everything I thought I knew about our past. And it was only the beginning. She took a deep breath on the other end of the line. The kind of breath that makes you feel like whatever is coming next will leave a mark. I was still sitting on the edge of my couch, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. Her silence stretched on, and I nearly snapped. Well? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. I was being blackmailed, she said finally. Blackmailed. The word hit me like ice water. Blackmailed? I repeated, disbelief dripping from every syllable. That's the excuse you're going with? After all this time, that's what you came up with. I'm not making this up, she said, her voice cracking. I wish I were. God, I wish I could take it all back. But it's the truth. I swear. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. Blackmailed? By who? Why? None of it made sense. She took my silence as an invitation to continue. The man you saw me with, his name was Eric. He wasn't just some random guy. He was dangerous. Dangerous. That word sparked something deep in my gut, a mix of anger and fear I couldn't quite place. You expect me to believe that? You expect me to believe that the guy I found you in bed with was some kind of, what? Criminal? Yes, she said simply. I laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself right now? You're trying to rewrite history because you feel guilty. Do you know how pathetic that is? I'm not rewriting anything, she snapped, her voice suddenly stronger, almost defiant. I didn't tell you the truth back then because I thought I could protect you. But I was wrong. I see that now. And I know you'll never forgive me, but you need to know what really happened. Protect me? I shot back, my anger boiling over. From what, exactly? From the truth? From your betrayal? Stop pretending you cheated on me for some noble reason. Just admit you were selfish and move on. Her voice broke then, and I could hear the tears she was trying to hold back. You don't understand. Eric wasn't just some fling. He was blackmailing me, threatening me, and he was threatening you too. That stopped me in my tracks. Me? What the hell are you talking about? She hesitated, as if saying the next words would cost her something. Eric, he was part of something bigger, something dangerous. I didn't realize it at first, but by the time I did, it was too late. He knew things about us, about you, your work, your family. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd ruin you. Or worse. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. You're seriously telling me that this guy was some kind of mobster? Or what? A spy? Do you hear how insane this sounds? I know how it sounds, she said quietly, but it's the truth. He wasn't just blackmailing me. He was using me. I don't even know how he got involved in our lives, but he knew everything. Your schedule, your bank accounts, your weaknesses. And he used them to control me. Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to believe she was lying, that this was just some elaborate story to ease her guilt. But there was something in her voice, something raw and desperate, that made it hard to dismiss outright. So what? I said finally, my voice cold. You slept with him to protect me? Is that what you're trying to say? Her silence was deafening. "Oh my God," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "You actually expect me to believe this, don't you?" "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice breaking again. "He had photos, videos, things he said he'd send to your boss, to your parents. He threatened to destroy you. And I thought if I just did what he wanted, he'd leave us alone. And how did that work out for you?" I shot back, the bitterness in my voice cutting even to my own ears. "It didn't," she admitted. "It only made things worse. I thought I could handle it, but he kept demanding more, threatening more. And then you found out, and everything fell apart." I leaned back on the couch, my head spinning. None of this made sense. None of it fit with the image I had in my head of what happened. For years, I told myself the story over and over again. She cheated. She lied. End of story. And now she was trying to unravel all of it with this insane tale of blackmail and danger. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked finally. "Because he's back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Those 3 words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean, he's back?" "I mean he called me," she said. "Yesterday. Out of nowhere. I thought he was gone, that he'd moved on. But he wants something. And he said if I didn't give it to him, he'd come after you again." My blood turned to ice. "What does he want?" "I don't know," she admitted. "He wasn't clear. But he mentioned you. He knows where you are. He knows you've moved on." Moved on. That was a generous way to put it. My life after the divorce had been anything but glamorous. I'd thrown myself into work, cut ties with most of our mutual friends, and buried myself in solitude. Sure, I dated a little here and there, but nothing serious. Trusting someone again felt impossible. Why would he come after me? I asked, my voice laced with skepticism. "I don't have anything to do with this." "He thinks you do," she said. "I don't know why, but he does. And I'm scared." "Okay? For you. For me. I don't know what he's capable of anymore." I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. This couldn't be real. It felt like some bad movie plot, the kind of thing you'd see on late-night TV. And yet, the fear in her voice was unmistakable. "What do you expect me to do about it?" I asked finally. "I don't know," she admitted. I thought you deserved to know. And maybe together, we can figure out how to stop him." I laughed bitterly. "Together? You think we're some kind of team now? After everything you've done?" "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything," she said, her voice breaking again. "But I don't know who else to turn to. Please, I don't want him to hurt you. Or anyone else." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Part of me wanted to tell her to go to hell, to deal with her mess on her own. But another part, a part one hated to admit still existed, felt something else. Concern. Curiosity. Maybe even the faintest trace of the love I'd tried so hard to bury. "I don't know if I believe you," I said finally. "But if what you're saying is true, we're going to need more than just this phone call." "I can meet you," she said quickly. "Anywhere you want. Just tell me when and where." I hesitated. Letting her back into my life, even for a moment, felt like opening a door I'd locked for a reason. But if what she was saying was true, I couldn't ignore it. "Fine," I said reluctantly. "Tomorrow, noon, at the coffee shop on 8th. "I'll be there," she said softly. "Thank you." I hung up without saying goodbye, my mind racing. I didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it was far from over. The next morning felt surreal, like the hours leading up to some unavoidable disaster. I couldn't shake the weight of her words from the night before, the way she had said his name, Eric, as though it carried all the darkness in the world. I spent hours pacing my apartment, replaying every detail of the last conversation. I wanted to believe she was lying, that this was some elaborate scheme to pull me back into her orbit. But there was one thing that gnawed at me, something I couldn't dismiss no matter how much I wanted to. She sounded terrified. Terrified people don't usually lie with that kind of precision. By the time noon rolled around, I felt like a storm was brewing inside me, half dread, half something I didn't want to name. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, ordered a black coffee I didn't plan to drink, and planted myself at the corner table. And then I waited. At exactly 12:03, she walked in. I hadn't seen her in 5 years, but the moment she stepped through the door, it was like no time had passed at all. She was thinner than I remembered, her face a little more hollow, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that screamed exhaustion. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me almost instantly. For a moment, she hesitated. I could see the flicker of doubt cross her face, the way her fingers tensed around the strap of her purse. But then she forced herself to move, weaving through the tables until she was standing in front of me. "Hi," she said softly. I didn't say anything. I just gestured for her to sit. She sank into the chair across from me, setting her bag down carefully at her feet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. "You look good," she said finally, her voice awkward and unsure. "I didn't come here for small talk," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. She winced but nodded. "Right. Sorry. Start from the beginning," I said, leaning forward. "No half-truths, no evasions. If you want me to take any of this seriously, I need the whole story. Now." She swallowed hard, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Okay," she said quietly. "The beginning." She looked out the window for a moment, as if trying to summon the courage to speak. When she finally did, her voice was steady but hollow, like she was reciting something she practiced 100 times. "Eric and I met at work," she began. "He wasn't a colleague, exactly. He was an external consultant. Charming, confident, the kind of guy who always knew exactly what to say to make you feel important. At first, I thought he was just friendly. But then he started asking questions, personal questions, about you, about us. I thought he was just being polite, but now I realize he was digging for information." I frowned, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "What kind of information?" "Everything," she said. "Your job, your schedule, your family." I didn't think anything of it at the time, but looking back, he knew way too much about us before anything even started. "And you let him get close anyway," I said bitterly. She flinched but didn't argue. "Yes," she admitted. "I did. I was stupid and selfish. And when he started flirting, I didn't stop him. I liked the attention, and I let it go too far." I wanted to interrupt, to throw her words back in her face, but I forced myself to stay quiet. If I was going to get the truth, I had to let her finish. "One night, after a work event, he offered to drive me home," she continued. "I'd had a few drinks, and I wasn't thinking clearly. He kissed me, and I didn't stop him. That was the first time." Her voice broke on the last word, and she had to pause to collect herself. "But it wasn't just an affair," she said, her voice shaking now. "It wasn't like I fell in love with him or wanted to leave you for him. It was a manipulation. He knew exactly how to control me, how to make me feel guilty, ashamed, trapped. And then, one day, he showed me a photo of us, of you and me, in our living room. I don't even know how he got it, but he said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd ruin you. He'd ruin both of us." I stared at her, my mind racing. A photo? How the hell did this guy even get into our house? What did he want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "At first, it was small things," she said. "Money, information about your job. But then it escalated. He wanted more, wanted me. He said if I didn't give him what he wanted, he'd go public with everything. He'd destroy your career, your reputation, your family. And I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep him at arm's length, but," her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her hands. "That night you found us," she said finally. "I wasn't there because I wanted to be. He made me. He said if I didn't show up, he'd send those photos to your boss. He'd tell everyone about us." I didn't know what else to do. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. None of this made sense. None of it fit with the story I'd been telling myself for the last 5 years. "You're telling me this guy just disappeared after that?" I asked skeptically. She shook her head. No. After you left, I cut him off. Changed my number, moved out of the house. I thought he'd moved on, that he'd found someone else to manipulate. But now he's back, and he knows where you are. Her words sent a chill down my spine. For years, I'd told myself that chapter of my life was closed, that the pain she caused was buried in the past. But now it felt like the past was clawing its way back to the surface, threatening to pull me under. What does he want this time? I asked. I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling. But I'm scared, and I don't know who else to turn to. I stared at her, my mind racing. I didn't trust her, not completely. But if what she was saying was true, I couldn't ignore it. Okay, I said finally. Let's figure this out. Together. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and fear. Thank you, she whispered. But as I sat there, staring at the woman I thought I'd never see again, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. I agreed to meet her again the next day, this time at a park near my apartment. It felt safer, more neutral, though I wasn't sure safe was even a concept anymore. She arrived 10 minutes late, looking over her shoulder as if she expected Eric to step out from behind a tree at any moment. She sat down next to me on the bench, her hands trembling as she clutched a coffee cup. I've been thinking about everything, she said quietly, trying to figure out how he found me again. And I prompted. I don't know, she admitted, her voice heavy with frustration, but I think he's been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. I frowned, the knot in my stomach tightening. Watching you how? Like following you? Probably, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I think he's been watching you too. My blood ran cold. What makes you think that? Because he knew things about your life now, she said. Things I didn't even know. He mentioned your new job, your apartment. He even said something about the nights you go to the gym. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me. How long have you known about this? Since he called me, she said. A few days ago. That's why I reached out. I didn't want you to get blindsided. Blindsided. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 5 years, I'd been building a life where she couldn't reach me, couldn't hurt me. And now, here she was, dragging me back into her chaos. So what do we do? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. I don't know, she admitted. But I think he wants something from you this time. From me? I repeated, disbelief laced through my words. What could I possibly have that he wants? I don't know, she said again, her voice trembling. But he's not going to stop until he gets it. I leaned back against the bench, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe her, but the pieces were starting to fit together in ways I couldn't ignore. If this Eric guy was as dangerous as she claimed, then ignoring him wasn't an option. Okay, I said finally. If he wants something from me, we need to figure out what it is. And we need to find him before he finds us. She nodded, a flicker of hope crossing her face. But as we sat there in the quiet of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window, passing cars, footsteps on the sidewalk, the faint hum of the city, felt like a warning. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that this Eric guy couldn't possibly be watching me. But the thought wouldn't leave my head. The next morning, my ex called again. I found something, she said, her voice urgent. I think it's important. Where are you? I asked. Your apartment. I'm outside. My stomach dropped. I hadn't given her my address. How did she? When I opened the door, she was standing there holding a crumpled envelope. It was in my mailbox, she said, shoving it into my hands. I think it's from him. The envelope had no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding, and pulled out a single photograph. It was a picture of me, sitting in my car. My hands shook as I stared at it. When was this taken? I don't know, she said, but look at the back. I flipped the photo over. Written in the same uneven handwriting were 3 words, "You owe me." My mind raced. Owe him? Owe him what? What does this mean? I asked, looking up at her. She shook her head. I don't know. But this isn't random. He's targeting you now. Whatever he wants, he's making it clear he won't stop until he gets it. I felt a surge of anger, mixed with something else, fear. For years, I'd thought I was free of her and everything she brought into my life. Now it felt like I was being dragged back into a nightmare I didn't ask for. We need to figure out who he is, I said, my voice firm. If we can find him first, maybe we can end this. She hesitated. I might know someone who can help. Who? She looked away, her expression uneasy. Someone I worked with back then. He knew about Eric. I think he might have more information. Fine, I said, grabbing my keys. Let's go. As we headed out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. The drive to meet her contact was silent, tense. She sat in the passenger seat, wringing her hands, while I kept my eyes on the road, my thoughts spinning. Who is this guy? I asked finally, breaking the silence. His name's Marcus, she said quietly. He was in the same department as Eric. He knew things. Things Eric didn't want anyone to know. And you trust him? She hesitated. I don't know, but he hated Eric. If anyone wants to see him taken down, it's Marcus. That didn't inspire much confidence, but I kept driving. Eventually, we pulled into a dingy parking lot outside a rundown diner. Marcus was already waiting, leaning against the hood of an old, beat-up sedan. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that made him look like he hadn't slept in days. You brought him? He asked, nodding toward me as we approached. He needs to know, she said firmly. Marcus eyed me warily before motioning us to follow him inside. We slid into a booth at the back of the diner, away from the other patrons. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. Eric's bad news, he began. You already know that. But what you don't know is how deep it goes. Deep? I asked, my voice skeptical. Marcus nodded. Eric wasn't just some random guy. He was part of a group, a network. They deal in blackmail, fraud, extortion, you name it. Eric was their fixer. If he targeted you, it wasn't personal. It was business. I frowned. What kind of business? I don't have money. I don't have anything they'd want. Marcus hesitated, glancing at her before answering. It's not about money. It's about leverage. Eric uses people, finds their weak spots, exploits them, and then uses them to get to someone else. You might not have anything, but maybe someone you know does. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone I know? My mind raced through the possibilities. Friends, colleagues, family. Who could possibly be connected to this mess? I need more than vague warnings, I said, my frustration boiling over. What does he want from me? Marcus shrugged. That's something only Eric knows. But if he's back, it means he's not done with you. I leaned back in the booth, running a hand through my hair. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whoever Eric was targeting, they were using me as a pawn. What do we do now? I asked, my voice low. Marcus glanced at her again before speaking. There's a safe house. Somewhere you can lay low until we figure out his next move. A safe house? I repeated, my tone skeptical. It's your best option, Marcus said. Trust me. Eric doesn't play games. If he's got his sights on you, you're already in danger. I wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't just paranoia. He was genuinely scared. Fine, I said finally. But this better not be another trap. As we left the diner, Marcus handed me a slip of paper with an address scribbled on it. Go there tonight, he said. I'll contact you when I have more information. I nodded, tucking the paper into my pocket. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking deeper into a nightmare with no way out. The safe house turned out to be a small, abandoned cabin on the edge of the city, surrounded by overgrown trees and a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. It wasn't exactly comforting, but maybe that was the point. If I couldn't find comfort, maybe Eric couldn't find us. The two of us sat in the dim light of a single, flickering lamp. She was perched on the edge of the worn-out couch, Her knees pulled to her chest. I stayed by the window, staring into the dark woods outside, waiting for something, anything, to happen. "Do you think Marcus is telling the truth?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted, not turning around. "But if he is, this is bigger than either of us." She didn't respond. The air between us was thick with tension, unspoken apologies, and the weight of the past we couldn't escape. "I keep thinking about the day I found out," I said suddenly, my voice low. "How everything fell apart so fast. One moment, I thought I had a life, a future, and the next, I trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. I turned to face her, my expression hard. "You keep saying that, but it doesn't change what you did." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But you need to know, everything I did, everything. I thought I was protecting you." I laughed bitterly. "Protecting me? By destroying me?" Her voice broke when she answered. "Yes, because if I didn't, Eric would have. And it would have been so much worse." I didn't respond. What was there to say? For 5 years, I'd hated her for what she did. And now, here she was, asking me to believe that she'd done it all for me. The silence stretched on until the sound of a car engine in the distance shattered it. We both froze. I moved to the window, my heart racing as headlights appeared through the trees. "Is it Marcus?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice tight. The car stopped a few yards away, its engine idling. The driver didn't get out. "Stay here," I said, grabbing the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a rusted fireplace poker leaning against the wall. "No, wait," she started, but I was already moving. I stepped outside, the cool night air biting at my skin. The car's headlights blinded me, but I could make out the silhouette of a man sitting in the driver's seat. "Who's there?" I called, gripping the poker tightly. The engine cut off, and the door opened. A man stepped out, his face shadowed in the faint moonlight. It wasn't Marcus. "Hello, old friend," the man said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "Eric." I knew it was him before he even stepped into the light. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident, predatory. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. He smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down my spine. "Just to talk," he said. "Talk about what?" He tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you haven't figured it out yet. You're smarter than that." I didn't lower the poker. "If you've got something to say, say it." His smile widened. "All right, I'll make it simple. You owe me." I clenched my jaw. "For what? I don't even know you." "Oh, but you do," he said, taking a step closer. "Your little ex made sure of that. She wasn't just protecting you, you know? She was paying off a debt." "What debt?" I asked, my voice sharp. He laughed, a low, mocking sound. "You really don't know, do you? All those late nights at work, all that overtime. Didn't you ever wonder why your company was doing so well? Why your projects always seemed to get the green light?" I froze, his words sinking in like poison. "She didn't tell you?" he continued, his tone mocking. "Of course she didn't. She struck a deal. I pulled some strings, made sure your career took off, and in return, well, let's just say she gave me what I wanted." My mind reeled. Was he lying? Manipulating me? Or was this another piece of the puzzle I didn't want to believe? "I don't believe you," I said finally, my voice shaking. Eric smirked. "You don't have to. But the fact is, you got where you are because of me. And now, it's time to pay up. What do you want?" I asked again, my grip tightening on the poker. He leaned in closer, his smile fading. "There's someone I need you to get close to. A client at your new firm. You'll be my in." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "You're insane if you think I'm going to help you." Eric shrugged, unfazed. "Maybe, but if you don't, let's just say your ex isn't the only one with skeletons in her closet. I wonder what your boss would think if certain files from your company's archives made their way to the authorities." Or maybe your family would like to know about that bonus you received 5 years ago. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't bluffing. I could see it in his eyes. You have 48 hours, he said, stepping back toward the car. Decide wisely. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the cold with the weight of his threats crushing down on me. When I walked back inside, she was waiting for me, her face pale. Was it him? She asked. I nodded, my hands shaking as I set the poker down. What did he say? I looked at her, the betrayal and fear warring inside me. He says I owe him, and he's not going away until I pay. The next 48 hours were a blur of anxiety and desperation. Eric's threats looped in my mind, each replay cutting deeper. He wasn't just a man. I realized that now. He was a predator, a puppet master who knew exactly how to pull the strings to make you dance. I thought about ignoring him, about standing my ground and refusing to play his game. But I wasn't naive enough to believe that would work. Eric wasn't bluffing. If I didn't do what he wanted, he'd burn everything down. My job, my family, my life. By the time the deadline loomed, I still didn't have a plan. She sat across from me in the cabin, wringing her hands as if she could twist the fear right out of her body. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. I don't know, I admitted, my voice hollow. But I can't just give him what he wants. If I do, I'll never get out of this. He'll keep coming back. She nodded, her expression haunted. That's how he works. Once he gets his hooks in, he never lets go. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. This was the man she'd been dealing with for years, the man who destroyed our marriage and forced her into the shadows. And now, he was coming for me. But then a thought hit me, something Marcus had said at the diner. Eric doesn't play games. If he's targeting you, it's for leverage. Leverage. I stood abruptly, pacing the length of the small cabin. What if we turn the tables on him? I said, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? Eric's entire operation is built on fear, on controlling people through secrets, I said, the words tumbling out faster now. But what if we find his secrets? What if we expose him before he can expose us? Her eyes widened. You mean go after him? Yes, I said firmly. Marcus said Eric's part of a network, right? That means he's not just some lone wolf. He's got connections, people he answers to. If we can figure out who he's working with, what he's really after, we can take him down. She hesitated, fear flashing across her face. That's dangerous. You don't know what he's capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of, I said, my voice hard. But I'm done letting him control my life. If we don't stop him now, he'll never stop. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She nodded slowly. Okay, what's the plan? It wasn't much of a plan, honestly. Just a desperate idea born out of fear and frustration. But it was all we had. The first step was getting in touch with Marcus. He was the only person who knew enough about Eric's operation to give us a starting point. When I called him, he sounded hesitant, afraid, even. But he agreed to meet us at a motel on the outskirts of town. When we arrived, Marcus was already there, pacing the room like a caged animal. You're crazy, he said as soon as we walked in. You don't go after Eric. That's a death sentence. We don't have a choice, I said firmly. He's not going to stop until he destroys both of us. If you know anything that can help us, now's the time to share it. Marcus hesitated, glancing between the two of us. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. There's one thing, he said reluctantly. Eric keeps everything, blackmail material, documents, contacts, in a secure location. A safe house like this, but better hidden. If you can find it, you might find enough to bring him down. Where is it? I asked. Marcus shook his head. I don't know exactly, but I know he used to talk about a storage unit, somewhere off the books. He kept it outside the city, away from his usual spots. He called it his vault. A vault. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. We left Marcus with a promise to contact him if we found anything, though I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't think we'd make it out of this alive. The next step was tracking down the storage unit. It took hours of searching, combing through public records and making calls, but eventually, we found it. A nondescript unit in a rundown facility on the edge of a desolate industrial park. Breaking in wasn't hard. The lock was simple, and the security cameras were laughable. But as soon as we stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The unit was packed with boxes, files, and electronics, evidence of years of manipulation and blackmail. Photos, videos, documents, it was all here. She stood frozen beside me, her hand covering her mouth as she stared at the evidence of Eric's twisted empire. This is everything, she whispered. Exactly, I said, already pulling out my phone to take pictures. We can use this. We can send it to the authorities, to the press. This will destroy him. But just as I was snapping a photo, a voice behind us made my blood run cold. Well, well, Eric said, his tone dripping with amusement. I have to admit, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you. We spun around to see him standing in the doorway, a gun in his hand and a cruel smile on his face. You should have just played along, he said, stepping closer. Now, you've forced me to get my hands dirty. My heart pounded as I tried to think of a way out. This is over, Eric, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We have everything. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down on you. He laughed, shaking his head. You think this is over? You think anyone will believe you? By the time I'm done, no one will even know you existed. But before he could take another step, she did something I never expected. She lunged at him. The struggle was chaotic, violent. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small space. I don't even remember grabbing the closest thing, a heavy metal box, but I swung it with everything I had, knocking Eric to the ground. When it was over, he was unconscious, the gun skittering across the floor. We need to go, she said, her voice shaking, but I shook my head. No, not yet. We spent the next hour gathering as much evidence as we could, making copies, taking photos. Then we called the police. When they arrived, Eric was still out cold, and we handed over everything. The files, the photos, the videos. It was enough to dismantle his entire operation. In the end, it was over. Truly over. But as I stood outside the storage unit, watching the police load Eric into the back of a squad car, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. She stood beside me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I'm sorry, she said softly. For everything. I nodded, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. For years, I'd thought closure would bring peace. But now I realized it wasn't that simple. The scars Eric left behind, scars she played a part in creating, would take much longer to heal. And maybe, just maybe, they never would.